Hello and welcome to twitch.tv/Adobe. My name is Terry White, Worldwide Design and Photography Evangelist for Adobe, and it's my pleasure to stream live here on the Adobe Twitch channel, doing a series, a actual Creative Cloud learning series. Let me make sure I get this up here correctly. There we go. This is our new Creative Cloud learning stream. And I'm kicking things off with an introduction to Photoshop over 5 weeks. So we're on the second week now. This is episode number 4, which in this case we're going to do a all about layers episode. So for people that are new to Photoshop, don't really quite understand layers, don't even maybe you're using layers but you don't really know how to use layers properly, what you can do with layers, we're going to spend the next little bit less than an hour dealing with what and all the things you can do with layers. So with that said, thanks for joining me. And let's go ahead and kick things over to Photoshop. Actually, let me do one thing first. Let me close this little document we were playing around with in the art of typography. All right, and now we can switch gears and switch over to the computer. Okay. All right, layers. We couldn't live without them. Layers, for those of you who are new to Photoshop, we take layers for granted. We take layers for granted in all of our programs. Matter of fact, we in most cases expect them to be there now. But layers actually were not in Photoshop since day one. Layers didn't arrive to Photoshop until version 3. So that meant version 1, all its iterations, version 2, all its iterations had no layers, had no multiple undos. Everything you did was on the canvas. You messed up, you start over. There was no way to put something on a layer and then change just that layer or delete that layer later. So to the early 25-year, 30-year, or 25-year Photoshop users, thank you for putting up with that back in the early days. I was one of them. I didn't get into Photoshop until version 2, and oh my God, when layers came out, it was all the buzz. It changed the way we use Photoshop. It was more forgiving for what we could do. Now, for those of you who are new to layers, what are layers? When you snap a photograph and you open it in Photoshop and you look at your layers panel, it's on something called the background. The background is in the layers panel, and some people refer to it as the background layer. Some people just refer to it as the background. I usually refer to it as the background. Sometimes I may slip up and say background layer. But it's really not technically a layer at first. It can be converted into one, but it's not one at first because it doesn't have all the properties of a layer. A layer can be transparent. A layer can sit on top of another layer. And all of those things won't happen to a background until you convert it into a layer. So the way I used to teach it back when I first started teaching layers with version 3 was think of it as you've got your background image, your photo, your whatever, and you have clear pieces of acetate on top. And on that acetate, or plastic, or whatever you want to call it, you could draw, you could scribble, and you would not, your underlying image would be protected. That's what layers are electronically in Photoshop. You can have as many as your computer can handle. I'll just put it that way. So if you got a lot of RAM, a lot of horsepower, you can have literally thousands of layers. And I know people that actually have worked with thousands of layers in a project. Layers are up to you to decide when you want one and how many you want and what you want to put on them. Personally, I like to be, I like using layers, but I don't use as many as other people. What I mean by that is, I only use a layer when I absolutely have to. And you might be asked, well, if they don't cost you anything, why are you only using a few or using fewer? Because they do cost you something. They cost you speed of the computer. They also, or the program, they also cost you file space when you're saving images. Since I work with hundreds and thousands of images per shoot, per photograph session that I do, when I'm doing retouching, I will use layers during the retouch for everything I need a layer for, but I usually don't keep them because when I save all those files, I don't want to save all that extra space for something that I 99.9% of the time will never go back to and adjust. However, if I'm doing any kind of compositing, if I'm doing any kind of graphic design, if I'm using type, if I'm doing anything like that, not photo retouching, I'm absolutely using layers. I'm using as many layers as I need because I want to have the flexibility of going back and changing anything I want anytime I want. So that's when I do use as many layers as it takes. So it just depends on what I'm working on, depends on what I'm doing when I use layers. Now, layers in Photoshop have evolved. Back when they first came out, they were just for pixels, just like the background. But now your layers can be for type, your layers can be for shapes, your layers can be in groups, your layers can be adjustment layers. You can have all kinds of layers for all different reasons. So it just depends on what you need a layer for. All right, so let me give you an example of just working with layers. I'm just looking over at my photos here that I've been grabbing from Adobe Stock to see what might work as a good layer example. All right, we'll use the soccer guy because he'll be easy to cut out. Just looking for a good background to put him on. All right, well, you know what? We'll use this. All right, I'm going to open up this file. And this is, like I said, you see over the right-hand side in the Layers panel, it says Background. Because even though it's in the Layers panel, and technically maybe somewhere it's documented that that's a layer, it's not a layer to me yet because it does not have the properties of a layer. I can't put something underneath it. So it's not a layer yet. It can be. Now, let's say I want to take the soccer guy. And I want to just go ahead and drag that image on top of this image. If I would have double clicked on it, it would have opened up a separate file. But as soon as I drag it on top, notice what happened. That became another layer in this file, or became a layer in this file. So and here, let me go ahead and lock it in. What can I do with this layer? Number one, I can move it around and it has no effect on the background. I can paint on it. And for example, and actually I can't paint on this one. Here, let's go ahead and I'm going to get into why I can't do this in a second. I just want to make one change real quick. Let's go ahead and rasterize this. Okay. All right, so now let's go ahead and say that I want to paint. Now notice what happens. If I start painting over here, I'm getting red, gaudy, bad paint, which looks like it's on top of the wood. And if I go across here, what did I just do? Okay, that worked. It's because I'm in the color mode. Hold on, undo. Sorry, my brush was in the wrong mode. Okay, let's try that again. Do this over here, and I come across here, and you're saying, well, you paint it on the wood, and you paint it on the soccer player. Well, no, I didn't. I only painted on the soccer player's layer. Now it looks like visually it's on top of the wood, and technically it is. Just like if I put down a clear piece of acetate and I paint on the clear part, that would be over the wood and it would look like it's on top of the wood, because it is. But if I turn that layer off, which that's what these icons are for, by the way, to hide a layer, to show a layer, if I turn that layer off, the wood is untouched, because I'm on another layer. I'm not messing with the wood layer. I'm only messing with the soccer player layer. So that's what layers have been for traditionally, not for painting like that, but to separate part of your image so that it looks like, so you can work on different parts without affecting other parts. You can work more non-destructively. You can be more forgiving if you make a mistake because you've only screwed up one layer versus maybe the whole thing. And if you make a mistake on one part of it, you're not making a mistake on the entire image. So that's what layers are traditionally. Now let's talk about some more attributes of layers. All right, so if I'm on the soccer player layer, and of course I can move the soccer player around, and the soccer player's layer has its own background. It's got a white background, which doesn't really look that good on top of this wood. So we have done, here, size it down just a little bit here. We have done various episodes of cutting things out and hiding things and so forth and so on. I'm going to show you, since we're talking about layers specifically, I'm going to show you various ways that you can work with a layer in a case where you want to cut something out like this. For example, back in the day, before we had any other good way to do it, you might have gone to something like, let's see, I think this is it, the eraser tool. Now, this is, and I had to even refresh my memory as to what the icon looked like because I never use it anymore. The eraser tool is just that. It's permanently erasing pixels. So if I say, hey, I don't want this white background, and I start erasing the white background, ooh, cool. But as soon as I get close to my object, that starts getting a lot harder. I'd have to zoom in, I'd have to pick a different brush, I'd have to do a lot more things to kind of erase this. And if I make a mistake and I don't see it right away, and I save the file and come back later, I may have erased part of the ball there and I don't notice it right away. If I save this and come back, that ball is gone. There's no getting it back without replacing this layer again and starting from scratch. So that's why we don't use the eraser as much as we used to, or if you are using it, okay, but there are better ways. So let's not do it that way. Now, if you want, and hold on, that's why. Go back to my essentials. If you want, there's other eraser tools now. There's a magic eraser and there's a background eraser. And I would just be remiss if I didn't show you these things. So the background eraser is more intelligent. It's designed for erasing backgrounds. The only difference is this one has a plus sign on it instead of the regular eraser that doesn't, because this is saying I will erase whatever color the plus sign is touching. So for example, if I start here, notice it's not erasing his arm because the plus sign is not touching that color. So I can go around him and I could do this, and you're saying, oh my God, that's cool. Why aren't we using that all the time? Because there are better ways. So even though this is more forgiving than the regular eraser tool, it's still not what we want most of the time. Even the time it's taking me to do this now is, again, going to be less forgiving if I make a mistake and just not, yeah, see, when I get to the ball, which is also white, then I get a problem. And if I've been doing this all in one stroke, oh no, I need to undo. If I undo, I undid it all. So I'd have to work in stages. I'd have to remember to stop along the way so that if I need to undo, I can undo just that one part. And last but not least is the magic eraser. And the magic eraser is like the magic wand, but an eraser. So if I click, it erases everything that was in the same tolerance as the white, which is part of the ball as well. So that becomes a problem. But those are all the ways we wouldn't do it anymore because just, again, all the issues we just saw. So let me undo this. And let me talk about masking. Masking is a much better way, and it's a layer feature. So if I want to hide the white, I can do it with a mask. And that way it's more forgiving. The way layer masks work is they work based on whether you have a selection or not. So in this case, I don't. And they allow you to hide parts of a layer with a color, with black or white. So for example, if I have a layer selected down at the very bottom of the layers panel, there's that little icon with a circle on it, this one right here, that's add a layer mask. If I say add a layer mask, then that will add a mask, that little icon next to the pixels, next to the object I'm working on, and that now becomes a mask for this layer. So that means I can go in and I can grab, instead of an eraser, I grab a paintbrush instead. And as long as my foreground color is set to black, which, hang on, I didn't zoom in properly. There we go. There we go. There we go. And as long as my foreground color is set to black, then I can mask. And the beauty of masking, you still have all the same issues with just that you would have had with the eraser. But the beauty of masking is that if I mask, and I'm using a soft brush, and I make a mistake and I don't see it right away, and I come back tomorrow after I've saved the file and I say, oh no, you've erased part of the ball, no problem. I can come back and say, oh, part of the ball is missing. Well, that mask, all it did was hide the white underneath the black. So all I'd have to do is switch to white and then bring the ball back, because the ball was never technically erased. So that's the difference between using masking on a layer versus using erasing the actual pixels of a layer. Now, if I really just wanted to cut this out, here, let's get it all the way back. All I would do is, the way I would always start my extractions is I would do a quick select. And this is not really what this is about. Let's just do a quick select on him real fast. And quick select lets me work in stages like this. So in case I miss parts, I can go back and get them. If I get too much, I can tell it to not get so much. Here we go, get the shoe, get all of the shoe. And good, we got them all, and then I can go get the ball. I'm not holding down any keys, it's automatically in add mode. All right. And I would make sure, be careful, walk my way around the image, make sure I'm not missing any pieces. This is an important part. But after I do my quick select, then I would just go up to the top. Anytime you make any selection, you have Refine Edge. And when I say Refine Edge, that will show me what I'm going to get. And it can show me any pieces I might have missed. Again, that's not the important part of this today. I usually add a little Smart Radius. I can do a little Shift Edge to kind of bring in, get rid of some of that white edge around him. Here, it looks like I didn't do a good job selecting that one spot. So we can clean that up a little bit around the ball. And then we'll click OK. Oh, sorry. Dang, I didn't mean to click OK. I didn't mean to click OK yet. All right, let's do Refine Edge one more time. What I want to do instead is I want to output this to a new layer with a mask. So what that will do is create another layer based on just this selection, and it will mask it, and it will turn off the previous layer. So that way I've now got the background, I've got the original soccer player with a white background, and I've got the soccer player with still with a white background. It's just that the white background's been masked for me with Refine Edge. And so, for example, I notice up here between his fingers that it didn't mask that out properly. Well, if I zoom in on that and I go to that mask and I grab my brush with black paint, I can go in and say, hey, put a hole right there between his fingers. Let's see what that would look like. All right. And he's slightly out of focus. That's why we see some of this drift here, because it was an action shot. And whoever shot this, the shutter speed wasn't high enough to freeze him. All right. But anyway, now that hole's been cut out of his fingers, and I didn't erase a single pixel. I didn't destroy this image at all. If I want to get part of any of this back, I just go to the mask and unmask it. So that's layers. Starting off, have as many as your computer can handle. Use layers to combine multiple objects together, and then you can work on one layer without affecting the other layers below. For example, let's say I want to move the ball onto its own layer and then move it. So what I can do is this. I can go to the layer that's got the soccer player on it. I can make a selection. It doesn't matter what the selection is, because right now, well, actually it would matter. Here, let's do this. Let's make a selection first. All right, we'll make a selection. So obviously I'm not selecting it round like the ball. And now I can go to my, I was going to hit the command key, but I'll go to my layer and I'll say new layer via copy, which means copy that layer, or copy just the selection and make it a new layer, or cut that selection and make a new layer. So if I say cut, that's what I knew would happen, is that it's cut it without the mask. So in other words, now that layer doesn't have the ball anymore. This one does. So I'd have to cut the ball out or mask the ball again, which is not a big deal. So for example, I could do this a couple of ways. We'll just show you the way I've been showing you for the sake of consistency. We'll select this one. Make sure we don't miss part of it like we did last time. All right, and then we'll refine edge on that, and we'll make a new layer. And again, I'm not trying to be careful on this one because we don't have enough time to be totally accurate on this, but I know it could use some work, but that's okay. We'll make a new layer of that. And now we've got the ball. Okay, so now at this point, I've got two layers I don't need. I don't really need the ball on its own layer with white anymore. I don't need the soccer player on its own layer with white anymore. What I want to end up with is just the background, just the soccer player, and just the ball. So the layers that got turned off, they're there forever. I can always go back to them. They're always there for protection. But I really don't need them because they're just duplicates of the layers that are already there with masks. And since I haven't permanently changed those layers either, they're really just duplicates. So what I can do is I can take the original soccer player layer and drag it to the little trash can at the bottom and delete it. That will keep my file size lower, meaning I'm not using more file size than I need to. Same thing with layer 1, which was the ball. Drag that one down. So now I'm just with the ball, the soccer player, and the background. Okay. Notice I said the ball layer, but that's not what it's called. It's called layer 1 copy. I can't stress this enough, and it's called good layer hygiene. It means name your layers, so that way you'll always know what they are at a glance without having to say, I can't see that little icon. Oh, maybe that's the ball. I don't know. You want to think about it. So let's go here, double click on layer 1, and just call it soccer ball. That way I know that that's the soccer ball layer. So just type it in, double click, change the name, hit return or enter, and then that becomes the name of that layer. You won't have to guess anymore. All right, now that the layers have been separated, if I go to the move tool, the ball can be further away. Go to the soccer player layer. The soccer player can be anywhere I want, and I can see some parts I didn't mask out yet. But the soccer player can be anywhere I want. So now I have the flexibility, because I'm working in layers, to work on any parts of this that I want without affecting the other parts. Okay. Stacking order of the layers can be important. So let me just pause for a quick second. Let me see if I'm missing any major questions. That's amaze balls. Nice pun there. Beauty of a layer mask, absolutely. Layer mask rock. Naming the layers makes you happy. Yes, it does. Naming the layers makes me happy, especially when you get more than a couple. Because when you get more than a few layers, having to constantly say, what's layer 3 again? What's layer 5 again? If they're named, it takes 2 seconds. It'll make your life that much easier. All right, next. Stacking order. Right now, the stacking order doesn't really matter because other than the soccer player and the ball being on top of the wood background, it doesn't matter which layer is above that first. It doesn't matter if the ball is above the soccer player or below the soccer player because they're not interacting with each other. Where that would matter is if I did this. Okay? That matters because we want the ball to be in front, even though we'd never put it there. Versus if I drag that layer down, now it's behind the foot. I don't know. Which one do you think would look more real? This one would probably look more real. because he's balancing the ball on his toe, sort of, or about to kick it, sort of. So that's where stacking layer comes in more, it becomes important. If I put it back here, now that kind of looks weird because there's also a perspective of size. Look how much bigger the soccer ball got behind his hand because his hand is further back in the frame, getting smaller, and the ball is the same size because the ball was more towards the camera over here. Over there, the ball looks the right size. Over here, it doesn't. So over here, if I were going to put it there, I'd want to size the ball down, which I can. All right. So that's why stacking order is important. Now, let's get back to this background layer and all the things that people are even saw in some of the comments there. The background, and I even said it, background layer there. The background's not a layer because I can't, by default, move it up. It just drops right back down because it's saying the background's always the background. It's always on the bottom. Don't move it. Don't touch me. Because traditionally, that's what the background's purpose has always been. However, you can at any time convert the background into a real layer, into a traditional layer. Before, it used to be a lot harder. Now it's so much easier in Photoshop CC. In order to convert that into a background, notice there's a little lock to the right of it. All you gotta do is click the lock. Just click the lock one time. Boom. Now it says layer 0 because now it's a layer. It doesn't know what to call it because it doesn't know that's a wood background, but it's layer 0 now. So now layer 0 can be moved up in the stacking order. Now it's above the ball. Now it's above the soccer player. Now it's back down to the bottom. It's a regular layer just like anything else. I can do anything I want to do to that layer. All right, so obviously we would want to name this, even though I can see the thumbnail. We want to name it so we can see it. Now, the other attributes of layers, the other properties of layers that you can have is that layers can be changed in terms of opacity or the transparency of the layer. So, for example, the soccer player and everything else is 100%. If I drop the opacity down of the soccer player, then the soccer player is now blended into the background because I'm making the soccer player less opaque. So that's why I can increase the opacity, lower the opacity. I use opacity all the time when it comes to adjustments in images because I may not want the adjustment to be the full size. Now, you see this fill, and you're saying, well, what's the difference? It seems to be doing the same thing. It will depend on the kind of object it is. If you have an object with an outline, lowering the opacity will lower the fill and the outline. Lowering the fill will just lower the fill, but keep the outline 100% or whatever you have it set to. So that's the difference, and that's why fill is there as a choice. We love Phil. Phil's a great guy. All right, next. Let's see, we talked about, and here, let's put this back up to 100. We talked about opacity. We talked about stacking order. We talked about stacking order, we talked about moving objects around on the layer. If I did want to size that soccer ball, since we're talking about it, I select its layer, and then I go to something called Free Transform. Under your Edit menu, you've got Free Transform. It's Command T. That's the way I always do it. Control T on Windows. When I do Command or Control T, that puts a bounding box around it. If I want to scale it proportionally, which I can't ever imagine too many cases when I don't, I hold down the Shift key, grab a corner, and then I can scale the ball down or make it bigger. If you make things bigger, keep in mind it has to re-render that image at more resolution than it originally was. So it has to guess and make up pixels. So the quality will likely not be as good if you make something bigger than it originally was. If you make something smaller, not a problem. You can also, not going to make a lot of difference here, but you can rotate things. You can move them around, obviously. You can flip them over if they needed to be flipped over. You can right-click on this bounding box and get to all of these other options while you've got Free Transform in place. And again, all of this is happening just to that one layer, not to the other layers. All right, let's talk about locking layers and locking transparency. All right, you notice that there's a lock icon, or you have all these icons at the top here, and they're all under the word lock. So here, let me go here, show you this. All right, so we've got lock transparency, we've got lock image pixels, we've got lock position, which means don't let it be moved. We've got prevent auto nesting into and out of, I don't want to see what that says. Into and out of artboards. I didn't even know that was there because we added artboards. That would make sense. And then we've got, this is probably the overall lock all, meaning don't let any changes happen to that layer. Okay, so for example, if I'm working on something and I don't want the other thing to move by accident, I don't want any changes to happen to it by accident, then what I can do is I can say just simply lock the ball. Now I can't make any changes to the ball. I can't move it. I can't do anything to it. I'm going to just keep getting this warning. But I can go to any other layer and do whatever I want. It's just the ball's been locked in place now, and I don't have to worry about it. By the way, this is going to bug me, so let's fix this real quick. We're just going to mask out this little part that didn't get masked the first time. There we go. All right. So anyway, now we've got that soccer ball layer locked. We've got this layer, which we can still do whatever we want with, and we can still move this player around without doing anything else to anything else. Now, there's some cases where you don't want to lock everything. I want to be able to work on a layer, but I want to lock certain aspects of the layer. So I don't use the lock as much as I use, oops, wrong one. Let me unlock that layer. As much as I use my favorite icon, which is the first one. I lock transparency a lot because what that means is I want to do something that affects the pixels of the layer without accidentally affecting the transparent part of the layer, the clear part. So if I lock transparency on the soccer player layer, what I have now done is I've said that if I wanted to change the color of his shirt, and I grab a brush and I grab a color and I set my blending mode to color, I can paint out here and nothing happens to the transparency. But if I go to his shirt starts to change in color. So locking transparency is something I do all the time because that helps me prevent making mistakes to something else in the layer by painting outside the line, so to speak, and I can change the color of his shirt without changing, without accidentally putting color on the transparent part of the layer. Now, I can get a skin because that's not transparent, so we don't want that, but I don't have to be as careful for the whole thing as I would had I not done that. All right, so that's locking transparency. I do that a lot because it helps me out. Trying to make an adjustment, I don't have to worry about adjusting the whole thing. So let me back up a little bit. I'm doing step backwards, which I talked about in one of my earlier sessions. Step backwards is your multiple undo in Photoshop. So I'm using the keyboard shortcut, Command Option Z or Control Alt Z to backwards, one step at a time. All right, next. All right. Yes, football, tiny soccer ball. Tee. Yes, football, soccer ball, depending on what part of the world you live in. This is not a football for me. Footballs are brown and oblong. All right, next. Yes, it would have been easier for kids to play with coloring books if we had a lock transparency. I would have been a much better artist if I could have done lock transparency as a kid. All right, next, let's talk about adjustment layers, because I think adjustment layers are huge in Photoshop. And you need to understand not only how to use them, but how to use them to only affect the areas you want to affect. So, for example, keep in mind what I have selected right now. I have the topmost layer selected, which is the soccer player. I have this whole panel of adjustments. These are all adjustment layers. If you were wondering, just for historical purposes, layers was introduced in Photoshop 3. Adjustment layers were introduced in Photoshop 4. So Photoshop 4 got adjustment layers. What adjustment layers allow me to do is non-destructive adjustments that are layer-based. So for example, if I want to, oh, so many choices, so little time. Let's say I want to apply, on an invert, I want to apply a black and white. The minute I tap black and white, look at what happened. It made everything black and white. I can still make adjustments to it, which is kind of cool. So I can adjust how that black and white looks based on the original color of the photo. I remember he had a yellow shirt on, so I'm adjusting the yellow in the photo to adjust how the black and white will look. And look at what it's doing to his shirt. Depending on where I put the yellow slider, it's adjusting the overall black and white. Now that's great. That's an adjustment. It's non-destructive. If I can turn that layer on and off, it is a layer. Awesome. But what if I don't want everything to be black and white? I just want my soccer player to be black and white. I don't want the wood to be black and white. I don't want the ball to be black and white. I don't want anything else to be black and white. So what you can do, and this is an age-old Photoshop trick for working with layers, especially adjustment layers, is there's a hidden feature that says I want to take the adjustment layer and bind it to just the layer below. And you'll get that option if you, here, let me zoom in so you can see it. So here's the soccer player layer. Here's the adjustment layer. If I point between the two layers, nothing happens. But if I hold down my Alt key and point between the two layers, I get that little funky icon that's like a square with an arrow down. If I click now, what I've just told it to do is apply that layer, apply that adjustment, I'm sorry. Hold on, oops, sorry. There we go. To just the layer below. So that way the ball's not affected, the wood's not affected, just the soccer player's affected because I told it to bind it or lock it to that layer below. So that is one of the ways that you can work with adjustment layers on specific areas. Now, another way you can work with an adjustment layer on a specific area is the adjustment layers themselves have masks. So, for example, you can apply a mask in the adjustment layer itself. So let me undo that. So now I put it back to a regular layer. And notice that I've got this adjustment. I'm sorry, I've got the adjustment layer, and the adjustment layer, I didn't do anything. It automatically came in with a mask. So the mask allows me to tell it what to apply this adjustment to, just the same way any other mask would work. So if I want to paint out that mask, I could go in and I could say, don't apply the mask to this part of the wood. I can make a wood hole in the mask, or with the mask of that adjustment. So layers have adjustments. Layers have masks. Adjustment layers have masks, and they work the same way. Now, it would be painful to have to go remask him again based on everything we just did. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to undo all this. We're going to throw away that adjustment. It's a layer just like any other layer. You can throw it away, turn it on, turn it off. Instead, before we apply that black and white adjustment, I want to tell it what to apply it to with a mask first. To do that, I've got the soccer player, and I've got the soccer player's mask already. We already cut him out. We already made a mask for him. So if I hold down my Command key on Mac Control key on Windows and click the mask, look at what it did. It made a selection based on all that. But what I can then do, because remember the ball was originally there, what I can then do is I can say add a layer mask, add an adjustment layer based on that selection we just made. So now click on black and white, and it will add the black and white based on that mask. Now you say, well, wait, Terry, the ball's there. There's a little black part at the top there. It shouldn't be black and white. No problem. All you got to do is just go adjust the mask real quick. So here, it's a lot easier fixing this mask than it would have been to have to draw it again from scratch. So we just go here and say, you know what? We don't want any of that. Oops, too small. There we go. Just get rid of all that. And just get rid of all this. So anywhere where the mask shouldn't be, just take it off. And we could go adjust that mask so we never have to do that again on the soccer player. But either way, we're good. So that way, the layer mask is applied to the adjustment layer. Now there's one downside to doing it this way. That layer mask is in a specific spot. So unless you remember to move everything at the same time, if you go move your soccer player and you don't move your adjustment layer, this is what will happen. And that's cool if you want that effect, but that's not what we want in this case. So in this case, we don't want it to move separately. So we hold down our Shift key, select both layers at the same time, let go of our Shift key, and then we're moving. And we got some more masking to do on the edges, but you get the idea. So you got to keep in mind that that was created in a specific spot, and if that underlying thing moves, that spot's still there. So you'd have to go fix it in both places or move it together. So that's adjustment layers, masking of adjustment layers, and what else? I'm just trying to think if I missed anything else. We talked about adjusting the adjustment layer, which is non-destructive. We threw away the adjustment layer. We can go back to this adjustment. We can keep making adjustments on it. Same way we were making before, because adjustment layers stay active the entire time. And of course they can be hidden, turned on and off at any given time. So you could export one with the mask, export one without. The adjustment layer. One with, one without. And just trying to see if there's anything else I'm missing in this spot before I move on. Okay. Next up, we're going to add a couple of different kinds of layers that we haven't added yet. So I'm going to put the adjustments back for now. I'm going to hide my black and white adjustment for now. I'm going to go to that black and white adjustment one more time, and I'm just going to point out one more thing you could do for effect before we do this last thing. We go to our adjustment layer mask, and we remember that it is a mask, so therefore it's masking this in black and white. We can go in and say, hey, I want a yellow shirt, and black and white everything else. So you could go unmask the shirt to whatever color it originally was, so it will not have the black and white effect. So just keep that in mind. If you want to do selective color using your adjustment layers and your mask. All right. And no, I'm not trying to be careful and do this properly. I'm just showing you what can be done. You guys go do it and take your time and zoom in. All right. I do want to fix it short stuff. Okay. Next up, two more types of layers, or layers in general. You've got shape layers and of course text. You've got shape tools here on the tool panel. You got rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, line tool. And I would say the one I use the most out of all of these are the rectangle and the line, mostly the line. That's why it was on the line. The line tool allows me to do just that. It allows me to draw lines. If I hold down my Shift key, it'll be a perfectly straight line. I can go in and I can say that I want that line to be a specific um, stroke, a specific color, a specific whatever. So for that, I'm going to bring up my properties panel. And the properties panel for that line will allow me to go in and make adjustments to it. I want to go in and I want to actually I want to go in. I want to do a couple things first. Okay. And I want to change the weight. Okay, the weight actually looks okay. All right, there we go. I got our white line. And I just want to show you the other shape just in case. If you go over here and you make another shape. Now, notice what it did. It made two new layers because every shape became its own layer. And let me undo that last one real quick. Just got another inspiration here. We'll put one around the ball. All right, so that became a new shape called rectangle. The first one became a new shape called shape 1. It doesn't know what it is. So I'm going to rename that one, and I'm going to call it line. And the line 1, line 2, horizontal line, whatever, however you want to name your lines is totally up to you. All right, now that we got our shapes in, let's do one more. Let's do text. So automatically, text has to be on its own kind of layer. You don't have pixel-based text anymore by default. Believe it or not, before text was before it was vector, it was pixel-based, and it was a selection in the image. It wasn't really even a. Let's drop this way down. It wasn't a fun time for anyone doing type. All right, we'll call it soccer or football for everyone else, but we'll call it soccer for now. And if I select that or just click OK, that becomes a new layer. Did it just make a layer out of me? No, it made a new layer called soccer. And it put it above the last layer that I had selected. So it put it above the line layer. If I want to move it up above everything, I can move it up anywhere I want. So you can now move any one of these elements independent of each other. So if I go to my move tool, I can move the word soccer, put it anywhere I want. I can size it, I can change the font, I can change anything about it. If I want to select the line, I go to the line layer and I can move the line anywhere that I want. If I want to select the rectangle, I've got the rectangle and I can move the rectangle around and do whatever I want to do to the rectangle. And if it's a shape layer, the shapes properties are now live inside Photoshop, whereas before you'd have to, if you wanted to make a change, you'd delete it and made a new shape. Now you can go in and do things like round the corners, and it still stays live with rounded corners now. So you can, it makes your design work a lot easier than having to constantly delete something and redo it because you changed your mind. All right, so we've got our soccer text, and we can size it the same way or size it any way we want. First, let's get the right font. Let's get our, since we just left a typography session an hour ago, let's make sure we get our typography looking the way we want. So let's go to our type tool. We can choose any font we want. I got some at the top here, I think, that are recently used. I think I kind of want to try. And never have too many fonts. Come on, get up there. Except for when it's slowing down your font menu. Then you might have too many. All right, so these are my recently used and my my favorites. So let's go not Bickham script. Actually, that looks pretty good. Clavicle bold or clavo bold. And now I'll decide whether or not I want that in all caps or not. Actually, I kind of like it upper and lowercase. And we'll go ahead and make it bigger. Now I could change the point size, or I could just Command T and free transform it and make it bigger. Either way. All right. And we'll adjust our kerning a little bit, letter spacing. Okay, then we'll position us where we want. We have some more type treatment to do this, but we're running low on time, so let me get back to the layers. We already did a whole thing on typography. And see, once you start messing with type, you can't stop. So, but I'm going to force myself to stop. All right, so let's get back to the layers. Now, notice what's happening. I'm starting to build up a lot, not a lot, but a decent amount of layers. And while these all have something to do with the project that I'm working on, I may want to maybe branch off and try or start adding more things. So what I can do is I can say, you know what really makes this image? It's the background, the soccer player, and the ball. That's really the image. Everything else is just add-ons. The line, the text, the rounded rectangle. Those are things I'm adding on to the design. So what I could do is I can say, well, you know what? The wood, hold down my shift key, the soccer ball, the soccer player, and the adjustment layer for the soccer player. That's really all that makes up the image. So I want to group those together and treat them as one. That's what this little folder icon is for. Create a new, it's technically a layer group, but create a new group. So now I've got this new group that I can rename. And now I don't have to worry about having to do everything separately anymore. I still can. If I twirl this down, I can still go affect every single object separately. But if I treat it as a group, I can now work with the group in and of itself. With the group selected, if I go to move anything, I'm using my move tool now. Oops. Oh, there's a layer that's locked in there. Hang on, sorry. Let's unlock that layer. There we go. Saying, hey, you're trying to move everything, but you got a layer locked. All right, so now if I go move that, see what's happening? Everything's moving. The ball, the soccer player, the adjustment layer, the background. The only thing that's not moving is what's not in that group. All right, so that way you can treat it all as one thing. You can also lower the opacity of all of it at the same time. Now the word soccer and the line and the rounded rectangle don't get affected. But a layer group allows you lots of flexibility in treating multiple layers as one layer when you need to, and still having the flexibility to get to each individual layer and do something different. So we use layer groups to kind of shorten the layer panel and keep everything more organized. But also it has a lot of uses for just making adjustments to what's in the entire group. If I wanted to free transform, I can now hit Command T and free transform that whole group, the player, the ball, the adjustment layer, and the background, all together. So that's why we love layer groups. Okay, 3 minutes left. What else can I do in layers in 3 minutes? We did adjustment layers, we did type, we did effect. Yeah. Layers can have effects. How could I forget effects? So for example, if we go to our soccer player, there's this FX icon at the bottom. I just twirl down, went to that one layer, and let's say that I want to do a drop shadow, because the government mandates that every beginner use drop shadows to put on their images. So now I've got this drop shadow, which I can drag around, by the way. That's a kind of a newbie feature that people don't know. You can actually drag the shadow around in the image and put it wherever you want. You can, of course, control all the aspects of it. So for example, if I wanted the opacity of that to be stronger, which I wouldn't, I can adjust that as well. Now, all of these effects are non-destructive. You can always go back to them and make changes to them, and they apply to the layer or group you have selected. So now that I've got that done, I could, for example, go to the soccer type, and I'm going to change the color of that type for a second here. My last couple minutes before Beetlejuice is up. Let's change our color and let's sample the gold in the shirt. All right, now we got that, and it kind of looks like, who cares? Why would you do that? Well, if we use our layer effects, we can use something called bevel and emboss. And with bevel and emboss, we can kind of make that look a lot more metallic just by changing the gloss contour. So we can play around with these different gloss contour settings and get different effects for our type treatment. I kind of like that one better. Not that one. That one. And I can still continue to work on this. I can say it's up or down. I can say it's inner versus an outer bevel. One of my favorite ones I used to use all the time was pillow emboss to make it look like it was kind of built into the wood. But all of these can be played with when you've got more time than I do right now. We can change the size. Too much, too much, too much. Too much of a good thing is usually a bad thing. All right, more, something like that. We click OK, and we've changed our type to be metallic. It still needs tweaking, but you get the idea. I'm almost out of time. All right, so with that said, hopefully my beginners in Photoshop know a lot more about layers and the kinds of things you can do with layers and layer groups and adjustment layers and masking and all the things we just covered. And with that said, guys, take care. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one, Tuesday, 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. Eastern Time here at twitch.tv/Adobe. And up next, up right now, Beetlejuice. Take it away.